Every year during the NFL draft process, you'll hear people often mention that we will truly know how good a draft class is in 3 years. And believe it or not, we are now 3 years removed from the 2022 NFL draft, and this class was absolutely loaded with talent. The number 1 pick in this class was Georgia's Travon Walker, who went to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the number 2 pick was the Michigan man Aiden Hutchinson, who went to the Detroit Lions. The first 5 picks in this draft were all defensive players, as Derek Stingley Jr., Sauce Gardner, and Kayvon Thibodeau rounded out the top 5. But there was talent all throughout this draft class, including the best final pick of any draft ever in 49ers quarterback Brock Purdy. In today's video, we will break down position groups as to just how talented the 2022 draft class was. And there is a lot to break down, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by talking about the defensive backs from this class. Derek Stingley and Sauce Gardner were the first 2 DBs taken, and this may seem like an eternity ago, but there was a point in time where Jets fans used to talk smack to Texans fans about having the better corner. The 2022 Texans finished 3-14, and Derek Stingley didn't have a great year. He missed some time, and the Texans weren't using him in the best way to maximize his skill set, and it was a bad year for the Texans. But he's followed it up with back-to-back 5 interception seasons, and D'Amico Ryans and the coaching staff have him looking like a completely different player, and it culminated in a first-team All-Pro for Stingley in 2024. Sauce Gardner had a down 2024 season relative to the first 2 years he had in the league, but he's still a very good player, and having 2 first-team All-Pros in your first 2 years at the second most difficult position to play in all of football does not happen by accident. People get their jokes in about Sauce because that's how the internet works, but he is a very good player, and I think he will bounce back in 2025. 2 first-team All-Pro corners in the first 4 picks of a draft really sets the tone for how good of a class this was. The next defensive back taken was, you guessed it, another first-team All-Pro and Ravens safety Kyle Hamilton. Hamilton is a very unique player, and he has 2 total All-Pros in 3 years, and he's accomplished this before turning 24 years old. This defensive back class could merit an entire video on its own, but it doesn't stop there either, as the next defensive back taken was Trent McDuffie of the Chiefs, who, like Hamilton, has 2 All-Pros in 3 years. It's one thing to have a class of players at a position to have several talented guys like the 2018 quarterback class for reference, which of course was Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson. However, there was a huge draft bust in the 2018 class, which of course was Josh Rosen. But to start your defensive back class with 4 first-team All-Pros is, as much as people hate this word, a generational class of DBs. There are 4 players from this class who have double-digit interceptions, and one of them was a first-team All-Pro in 2024 in Lions safety Kerby Joseph. Joseph led the league in interceptions this year with 9, as the Lions would go on to win 15 games and be the number 1 seed. Cowboys corner Deron Bland had 9 interceptions in 2023, and 5 of those were house calls, as he was on his way to being a first-team All-Pro after being selected 167th overall during the 2022 draft. Reek Woolen of the Seahawks is also a solid player, and had 6 interceptions back in 2022, and he's had his ups and downs as a pro, but I think it's been far more good than bad. Then there's other guys like Christian Benford, Zion McCollum, Jalen Petrie, and Kader Kohou have all been impactful players too. It's one thing to have a good player or 2 at the top of the class, but for Derek Stingley, Sauce Gardner, and Kyle Hamilton to all have first-team All-Pro selections, and even Trent McDuffie, while having several other players in this class have Pro Bowl nods deep in the class, and even other first-team All-Pro players, speaks to where the secondary is from the 2022 draft class. And in a lot of ways, it's like having a security blanket on the back end of the defense. And before we continue, I ask the question, have you ever dealt with an insurance company that seemed to care more about profits than your well-being? And if you have, then did you think about hiring a lawyer, which admittedly can be an intimidating process? Morgan & Morgan is the sponsor of today's video, and unfortunately accidents happen. My parents were involved in a very minor car crash last summer, and they were okay, thankfully, but there are a few things you need to know if you are involved in an accident. Make sure you're okay, make sure you get a police report, contact your insurance, and make sure to get legal representation. Morgan & Morgan has modernized the injury law process so you can submit a claim and communicate with your legal team all from your smartphone. In 8 clicks or less, you can submit a claim with Morgan & Morgan, and the fee is absolutely free unless you win, and all law firms are not the same. Morgan & Morgan is the biggest for a reason. They've won a lot, and if you were injured or hurt in an accident in any way, you should know how to protect your rights. Don't overthink it. Take action to protect your rights, and Morgan & Morgan will fight for their clients to get the compensation you deserve. You can start your claim with Morgan & Morgan at tryforthepeople.com/footballanalysis. Once again, that's tryforthepeople.com/footballanalysis, and a big thank you to Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's video. What's kind of funny about the 2022 draft class is this running back class was not heralded as generational or an all-world talent class when they came out that year. Yes, Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker were clearly the best two running backs in the class as prospects, and they've played pretty well through the first couple of years of their career. But Tyler Algier actually has more rushing yards than Breece Hall, and that's not Breece Hall slander as much as it is to say there are several good running backs from this class, whether it's Kyren Williams, James Cook, like we mentioned with Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker, Brian Robinson Jr., Isaiah Pacheco, even in the 7th round. Talent was all throughout the draft at the running back position. There are currently 8 running backs from this class that have over 2,000 career rushing yards just 3 years into their careers. Now, as we know, the running back position doesn't have as long of a career as receivers do, for example, much less quarterbacks, but for those players to be as productive as they have is a testament to just how talented the 2022 draft class was. James Cook had one heck of a 2024 season and actually had 18 total touchdowns this past year, and he's a big reason as to why the Bills have won as far as they have. Last year, it was a lot of the Josh Allen show, where Josh has to do quite literally everything, and he had 15 rushing touchdowns in 2023, and he still had 12 rushing touchdowns in 2024, but James Cook stepped up in a big way for Buffalo this year. Kyren Williams only had 139 rushing yards during his rookie season back in 2022, and there were a lot of questions for the Rams entering 2023 of how they were going to rebound off of a bad 2022 season, which was due in large part to Matt Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Aaron Donald all missing significant time due to injury. What nobody factored in was Kyren Williams rushing for over 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns, and then outdoing himself again in 2024 and having another career year. Some people also forget that Tyler Algier actually had a 1,000-yard year before they selected Bijan Robinson in the top 10 of the 2023 draft. There's also several good offensive linemen from this class, and I think one of the most underrated linemen in all of football is Colts left tackle Bernhard Raimann. Very quietly, they drafted a franchise left tackle in the 3rd round as a developmental pick, and a lot of the times in the draft process you will hear that this player is a developmental pick, and some people will roll their eyes and basically say, alright, well, how often do these developmental picks actually work out? But Bernhard Raimann has more than worked out for the Colts, and I would be pretty surprised if he's not a multiple-time Pro Bowler when it's all said and done. The Ravens drafted who I thought was the best interior offensive lineman in the class in Tyler Linderbaum, and he's played exactly like that through the first 3 years. There were a couple of underwhelming offensive tackles through the first couple of rounds, Evan Neal, of course, being one of them, but there's still very good offensive linemen, like we just mentioned, in Tyler Linderbaum and Bernhard Raimann, but there's also some underrated gems in Zach Tom and Braxton Jones for the Bears. So this class really had it all on the offensive side, minus one position, which we'll get to in a minute, and Mr. Irrelevant himself kind of saved that position, but for 8 running backs to have over 2,000 total yards in the first 3 years of their career is a testament to how good the 2022 draft class was. Nobody thought Isaiah Pacheco would rush for that many yards, especially as a 7th round pick, and I'll be honest, Kyren Williams was one of the more surprising players we've seen break out over the past couple of years, because I didn't think there was a chance after a pretty underwhelming rookie season that he would all of a sudden be one of the best running backs in all of football. The wide receivers from this class have been pretty solid through the first 3 years of their careers. The first receiver taken in this class was Atlanta's Drake London, who had his first 1,000-yard season in 2024, as he had 100 receptions for nearly 1,300 yards and 9 touchdowns. Drake started his career with a near 900-yard season back in 2022, and a 905-yard season in 2023, and the consensus with Drake London entering 2024 was if he gets a good quarterback rather than have guys like Desmond Ridder, who ironically is also a part of the 2022 draft class, Taylor Heineke and Marcus Mariota throw him the football, then he would probably be a consistent 1,000-yard receiver. And with competent quarterback play, he was exactly that in 2024. And with Michael Penix in the Big A, I think Drake London will consistently be a 1,000-yard player from here on out. Garrett Wilson was the second receiver taken as he was selected at number 10 overall, and Wilson was the Offensive Rookie of the Year from this class as him and Sauce Gardner became the first teammate duo to win the Rookie of the Year awards since Alvin Kamara and Marshawn Lattimore back in 2017. CJ Stroud and Will Anderson would of course do it a year later in 2023. Wilson has had at least 1,000 yards in every season since being drafted out of Ohio State, and like with Drake London, I also think he is a player who has not achieved his full potential since being a top 10 pick 3 years ago. Obviously, the quarterbacking play in 2022 and 2023 was terrible, as it was a combination of guys like Zach Wilson, Mike White, Joe Flacco, and Tim Boyle, but he had a more efficient 2024 than either of his first 2 years. I still am under the belief that Wilson and London could each have a year where they have 14 or 1,500 yards, and needless to say, that's a really good duo to be the first receivers drafted. Chris Olave had 1,000 yards in 2022 and 2023, but only played 8 games this past year as he missed a lot of time due to a concussion. I don't know what Olave's football future holds, but he is a very talented player, and this was an absolute hit of a draft pick. The theme of this class is having good receivers that never hit their peak due to quarterbacks limiting what they could do, and I think Olave is another example of that. He had Derek Carr as his quarterback, who was better than some of the other guys we mentioned, but I also think it's fair to say Olave could be a 12 or 1,300 yard receiver when healthy. George Pickens is third in this class in receiving yards, and George is a very talented receiver who has one 1,000 yard season to his name, which was in 2023, as he had over 1,100 yards and 5 touchdowns. One of the most surprising things about this class is there hasn't been a player who has been a huge touchdown scorer, at least consistently. Drake London is actually tied with Romeo Doubs for the most receiving touchdowns in this class with 15 for reference. Jameson Williams tore his ACL in the 2022 National Championship game and missed most of his rookie season and was suspended for some of 2023, and in his first full year of work in 2024, he had a 1,000 yard season, and for anyone who didn't watch much of the 2024 Lions, I'll say it, Jameson Williams is a problem. He is dynamite with the football in his hands, and he could end up being the guy to lead this class in receiving touchdowns when it's all said and done. Khalil Shakir and Christian Watson of course deserve mentions too, and although not a receiver, Trey McBride just had an 1,100 yard season with the Cardinals and is 5th in receiving yards in this class. And while the 2022 class may not have a Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, this class is loaded with talent at the receiver position and has several good receivers, many of which have already had 1,000 yard years. And to have 6 guys have 1,000 yard seasons at some point in their career speaks volumes as to how talented of a class this is. The pass rushers from this class have also been really good, and it started with the first 2 picks in Trayvon Walker and Aiden Hutchinson. And I think there's this misconception with Trayvon Walker that he's this below average football player, and that the Lions drafted a perennial defensive player of the year candidate, especially based on how Hutch was playing in the first couple of weeks of 2024, before unfortunately suffering a season-ending injury. But Trayvon Walker is a very, very good football player, and a lot of teams would love to have Trayvon Walker on their team. He is a really, really solid player, and I do think he will make a couple of Pro Bowls before it's all said and done, but it didn't just stop with those 2. George Karlaftis has been a really good player for the Chiefs, and he's developed into a really good complementary player to Chris Jones. Boye Mafe of the Seahawks has been pretty good as well, and Nick Benito for the Broncos just had a 13.5 sack season, and that was a player that I really liked coming out of Oklahoma, and a guy that has developed the right way over the past couple of years. Jermaine Johnson for the Jets made a Pro Bowl in 2023, before unfortunately suffering a torn Achilles at the beginning of the 2024 season. Now, I do think Kayvon Thibodeau has been slightly underwhelming as a number 5 overall pick, especially from this class, when you look at how many talented pass rushers there were, but there could be a lot worse players selected in the top 5, and I know sacks are not everything, but he did have a double-digit sack season in 2023, which Giants fans will point to when defending their guy. Again, I don't think Kayvon Thibodeau has necessarily lived up to being a top 5 pick, and I do think he is kind of underwhelming as a pass rusher, but there at least was some production at one point, and there could be a lot worse picks with a top 5 selection. The linebackers from this class have 4 really distinct players that stand out in no order in Nakobe Dean, Devin Lloyd, Leo Chenal, and Malcolm Rodriguez, and I liked a couple of these guys coming out, especially Nakobe Dean and Leo Chenal, and unfortunately Nakobe Dean recently suffered a major injury in the postseason, but after having an underwhelming rookie year back in 2022, I really think Devin Lloyd has stepped up in a big way over the past couple of years. It's not how you start, it's how you finish, and that applies to the linebacker class, with all of these guys progressively getting better as their careers have went on, and I think this really applies to far and away the best quarterback from this class in Mr. Irrelevant Brock Purdy. Now, when you think of the 2022 quarterback class, you're probably going to think of Kenny Pickett, who was a draft bust as he's now on a second team, or Malik Willis or Desmond Ridder, and you get the point. But having Brock Purdy be the quarterback from your class is certainly not a bad thing. I know people have heavy opinions on Brock Purdy, and they think that he is a clear product of Kyle Shanahan, or that he's a clear product of the 49ers, but I think he is a really, really good player, and I think he's an underrated player at the position, and I don't think Brock Purdy gets enough love. He will soon get paid, and I would argue that that's rightfully so, because I think he is a really talented quarterback. The 2022 class would certainly be missing something if they did not have a signature quarterback, and while I don't think Brock Purdy is in the big four, if you will, of the Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, and Burrows of the world, I think he is a very solid quarterback, and remember, the 49ers got to a Super Bowl for a reason. It wasn't obviously all because of Brock Purdy, but he had to get them there to begin with. Brock Purdy is a really talented player, and there are a lot of teams that wish they had him on their roster. Overall, the 2022 draft class was really good, and I would argue in some ways underrated, and the strengths of this class were undoubtedly the secondary, as the first 4 secondary players through the first 3 years have already been named first-team All-Pro at least once. That's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 46% of people watching are subscribed, and helps the channel tremendously. Thank you to Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's video, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.